Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to the class, both to new and long-time students and lovers of history. This is History with Sire here today, to discuss with you further about France and Revolution and the cause of the revolution. In this video, we're going to be looking at how Enlightenment and the Philosophes could indeed have caused the revolution by 1789. We're going to look at some ideas that were about in this era, new ideas we should very much highlight, mention how things like democracy and free voting taken for granted in our time, but they're very much novel in this time here in the 1700s. So I'm going to be considering that today, and of course, bear that in mind. How could these be clear? How could these ideas be clear causes for the revolution? With that in mind, notepads and pens at the ready, and let us begin. Exactly is the Enlightenment? Well, quite literally, in the 18th century, there was a movement of writers and thinkers, not just in France, but throughout the world, who were questioning and challenging how the world worked. For instance, what exactly should the role of monarchy be? What is religion's role in society? Should tradition really be followed? And how should politics, history, science, and nature be considered? Should it be in the old fashioned sense, or should a new way of interpreting life be considered instead? Their analysis was very much based on reason and rational thought. In France, they are philosophes. We want to make this very clear, but they're not necessarily philosophers. They're actually more so writers, enlightened writers, using education to rationalize things rather than simply say it's religion or it's God. One thing all of them are going to explore today have in common is they're all very much in support of freedom, particularly freedom of speech, press, trade, and from arrest. The Philosophes do not accept any literal interpretation from the Bible, and they reject anything that does not adhere to explanation by reason. They very much want logic, logos, to be very much followed in the Socrates tradition. Some of them even dare to say that the Catholic Church itself is corrupt, and for France's context, as you should remember, means they're also directly attacking the authority and power of the First Estate. So we have three of them on the screen here. Let's meet them all in turn and the ideas that they're preaching and professing throughout France. The first we should look at is Rousseau, a man who famously said that man is born free, but yet everywhere he finds himself in chains. Now, what exactly does Rousseau argue? He argues for this idea of a social contract, that there's a belief in society that everyone must follow. They have the given role. Every citizen, in some way, has a say in how the world works. While some are born rich, some are born poor, some are born without any power, they should indeed have some sort of citizenship right that allows them to choose in some way the laws under which they must live and therefore accept. He does indeed concede that people have responsibility towards their rulers and should appreciate their control, but this appreciation and therefore power and control should be shared in some way. He was very much a Republican, believing that monarchy itself is not the natural ruler, is not fair, and therefore, while yes, he's in favor of there being leaders, of there being something above the vast amount of people to run society, he doesn't necessarily believe that monarchy is what it should be, and therefore argues against the monarchy, especially as it, in recent times in France, we can see, has only been serving the interests of the ruling classes. Again, remember from our previous video, we said because of religion and because of the structure of the parliament, the first and second estates have a clear monopoly on power and influence over the king in his court, while the third estate is very much exiled from that. In a lot of ways, though, this means Rousseau is challenging the ideas of the Ancien regime massively. Because as we can see, because of the system, people aren't free. They're indeed trapped under feudalism, under this system, and therefore can't acquire wealth to change their social standings in any way at all. By sharing responsibility, Rousseau is actually calling for the third estate to have more power and more influence, and through this can therefore challenge the monopoly on power that has been established by the first and second estates. The second individual we can consider is also Voltaire. Voltaire took inspiration directly from the government in England. He very much supported and praised how English law was passed. He saw it as a more tolerant and liberal society, and in contrast to the French monarchy's very much absolutist mentality, and therefore the oppression that the establishment of the estates was bringing onto the people. He also used his essays and writings to very publicly slander the power of the Catholic Church and the clergy directly. He was very much a Republican as well, and because of his critiques, He found many of his essays were burned and publicly slandered, especially by the clergy. All in all, though, he still very much supported freedom in the press and free speech because he wanted this for the third estate. Like Rousseau, he very much believed that through freedom of expression, the third estate would be able to openly challenge their position under the first and second estate's control, and therefore gain some sort of legal influence to stop them. Again, remember from our primary source we looked at with the cartoon, the first and second estates are always uniting to oppress the third estate and keep them submitted. Perhaps one way they could escape that oppression is if they could speak freely and therefore find a way to remove the deep taxation and economic burden that is holding them back. Our third and final philosopher to consider is Montesquieu. Now, this man challenged the estates quite directly. He openly challenged them and the ancien regime, going as far as to say the feudal society that it promotes should be outright abolished. Like Voltaire, he favoured a British model of government, believing that France, like Britain, should one day become a constitutional monarchy, whereby a monarch's power is restrained by some type of assembly, whether it's a parliament or something else. However, he was, despite all of his idealisms, very much cautious about an outright democracy with free voting and therefore free control for the people. He believed this had a big chance of falling into mob rule or a mobocracy, and therefore that ruling elites benefited from an understanding of how to govern that common people did not possess. Montesquieu's views, therefore, very much align close with the bourgeois, believing that the educated have a better chance of ruling rather than just for themselves. And for him, that was the linchpin needed, that this middle class who were educated but also very much understood the problems that faced the peasantry and the wider poor people in society, because they themselves were also vastly poorer than the first and second estates. How exactly do these new ideas impact the ancien regime? Well, quite massively. These are radical ideas. For instance, the idea of free speech or freedom generally would mean the peasants would no longer have to pay their feudal dues, and therefore Louis' Lettres de Cachette are basically worthless. In doing so as well, you're giving a lot of power to the third estate, a lot of power they've never really had, and therefore in doing so undermining the power of the first and second estates, who Louis himself is also very much surrounded by. Furthermore, if you added in some sort of constitution to limit the king's power, you're effectively saying divine right was a lie, and therefore that the religious beliefs that people have that the king is God on earth, the Catholic, this deeply embedded Catholic belief over generations, by this point over 130 years of rule, would therefore be lost, and therefore the king would question in why should he have this power? Should they even have a monarch or king at all? All in all, though, the real impact of the Enlightenment and all these new ideas is the third estate's own power expands not just politically, but also economically, culturally, and socially. And in doing so, you've reduced the influence of the first and second estates massively, especially the first estate, because by undermining divine right, you're undermining Catholicism as a whole. And although the bishops may call it blasphemous and ungodly, if by admitting you need a constitution, you're therefore admitting to yourself that society's structure, the ancien regime, is innately wrong. And this is a massive thing for the king to admit and allow to happen. And so do bear this in mind as we go throughout the rest of our series with these new ideas. Although they start here with the Philosophes and are just a small circle of writers, they're going to expand, and the way they're presented is going to leak out not just to the rich and the educated, but also to the peasantry as well, the sans-culottes and the bourgeois. They're going to have their own interpretation of these ideas, and we're going to see ideas of this come about in different forms, all very much in the same vein, this idea there should be a limit on the monarchy's power, and improvement in influence for the third estate and the peasantry, and maybe some would dare to say no need for a monarchy at all. But how exactly a republic of that sort should form, well, we're going to see as our series goes on much deeper beyond 1789, and maybe indeed beyond Louis's life itself. But we'll explore all that in further videos on the series. As always, I hope you find these useful. Do let me know in the comments below how it's going, and do check out the further reading in the description box below if you wish to learn more about the Philosophes and the Enlightenment. Beyond this, it's not just in France, it's also beyond. It's also occurring throughout Europe and other parts of the world. With all that said, this has been History with Sire. Thank you for listening.